There's a certain ache that settles in your chest when you realize someone's behavior toward you isn't just cold or distant. It's intentionally wounding. We often chalk it up to hate because that's easier to name. But sometimes what we're seeing isn't just dislike. It's resentment. It's envy. It's a quiet war they've been waging against you in the shadows of your life. The most painful part, it's not always loud. It's subtle. It's in the way they sigh when you speak, the way they smile just a second too late, the way they cheer for everyone else but go silent when it's your turn to shine. And if you're feeling confused, hurt, or constantly second guessing yourself around someone, you're not imagining things. Sometimes the truth is that the person doesn't just hate you. There's something deeper, darker, and much more personal going on. Let's talk about it, honestly, gently, but truthfully. We often think that harm has to be obvious. Raised voices, slammed doors, cruel words shouted in anger. But some of the deepest wounds come from the subtlest behavior. It's in the way someone consistently forgets to mention your name when giving credit. It's in how they give you just enough attention to keep you hoping, but not enough to make you feel safe. It's how they respond with a blank stare when you share something you're proud of, making you question whether your joy is too loud or your presence too much. These aren't accidents, they're choices. Calculated, quiet forms of rejection. The people who shrink you silently rarely get called out because they're careful. They use politeness as a weapon. They know how to make their disapproval look like detachment and their judgment sound like just being honest. And when you start to notice how their energy shifts when you enter the room, how their tone flattens when you're the one speaking, it's easy to gaslight yourself. You think, maybe I'm overreacting, maybe I'm too sensitive. But you're not. You're just awake to a dynamic that's been eroding your spirit in small, consistent ways. And the hardest part, these kinds of attacks don't give you a clear reason to walk away. There's no blow-up fight, no direct insult. Just 1,000 small cuts that you try to ignore until one day you realize you've bled yourself dry trying to earn love that was never being offered freely. This is why it hurts so much, because it leaves you with no closure, just confusion. You start to question your value, not because you did something wrong, but because someone made you feel invisible without ever saying it out loud. And invisibility is one of the most painful ways to be erased. This is not about being dramatic. It's about naming the ways we're slowly undone by people who smile through their resentment. It's about recognizing that the absence of kindness, when intentional, is its own form of cruelty. You deserve spaces where your light isn't just tolerated but welcomed, where your presence doesn't make someone else retreat or compete. The ache you feel when someone quietly shrinks you is real. And the sooner you honor that feeling, the sooner you can begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that started to dim in their shadow. There's a very specific kind of pain that comes when someone you care about, someone you expected to be proud of you, all silent in the moments you thought they'd be clapping the loudest. It stings, doesn't it? When you achieve something meaningful, take a brave step, or grow in a way that took every ounce of your courage, and instead of receiving support, you're met with indifference, or worse, with sarcasm. A shrug, a passive-aggressive comment masked as a joke, and suddenly you find yourself shrinking your success to fit the comfort of someone else's silence. But the truth is, their reaction isn't really about you. It's about them. It's about what your progress triggers in their unfinished stories. Because your success, your light, your evolution, it reminds them of the places they're still stuck, the goals they abandoned, the dreams they buried, the risks they were too afraid to take. And when people haven't made peace with their own journey, it becomes nearly impossible for them to genuinely celebrate someone else's. This doesn't mean they're bad people. It means they're hurting deeply. It means they're still carrying shame, regret, or fear that distorts the way they show up for others. They might even love you. But if they haven't learned how to hold space for their own disappointment, they will never know how to make room for your joy. That's not your fault. And it's not your responsibility to make yourself smaller just to protect their comfort. Still, this kind of dynamic can leave you questioning everything. Should you have said less, been quieter about your wins, downplayed your excitement so they wouldn't feel threatened? But here's what you need to hear. Shrinking your light doesn't make someone else feel brighter. It just makes the room darker for both of you. Your joy is not arrogant. Your growth is not a threat. And you should never feel guilty for evolving simply because someone else hasn't found the courage to begin. At the end of the day, the people who are truly for you, the ones who are grounded in their own worth, won't be rattled by your radiance. They'll reflect it, they'll amplify it, And if someone consistently fails to show up for your wins, it might be time to stop asking them to hold the mic at your celebration. Their silence doesn't mean your success isn't worthy. It just means your circle needs adjusting. Because your joy deserves witnesses, not critics pretending to be supporters. We're taught to look out for the obvious villains, the ones who shout, who criticize, who openly oppose us. But the betrayal that cuts the deepest is rarely that loud. It's quiet, polite, masked by charm and layered with just enough kindness to keep you second, guessing your instincts. It's the friend who hugs you at the party and laughs with you, then repeats your private pain to someone else the next day. It's the person who says, "I'm just looking out for you," while subtly planting seeds of doubt that make you question yourself. This isn't just betrayal. It's emotional manipulation in disguise. What makes it so painful is not just what they did, but the way they made you feel safe first. You trusted them, you opened up, you invited them into sacred parts of your story, and instead of holding those parts with tenderness, they turned them into tools for gossip, for control, for competition. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're left holding 1,000 pieces of broken trust, wondering how you missed the signs. The hardest part is that people like this often aren't obvious about it. They'll smile to your face, compliment you in public, defend you just enough to keep you believing they're on your side, but behind closed doors, they dilute your truth, they distort your narrative, they share your secrets in rooms where your name becomes an object, not a person. And yet, when you confront them, they say you're imagining things, that you're too sensitive, that you're taking things the wrong way. And so, the betrayal isn't just in what they did, it's in how they made you doubt your right to feel hurt. Let's be honest, this kind of pain can make you question yourself. It makes you wonder if you're overreacting, if maybe you were expecting too much. But betrayal doesn't always come with a knife in the back. Sometimes it shows up with a warm smile and words that feel supportive, until you realize they're being used as cover for something much colder underneath. When someone repeatedly shows you loyalty in public, but disrespects your dignity in private, you are not obligated to stay in that confusion. You don't have to keep giving access to someone who keeps mishandling your trust. You deserve relationships that are safe on both sides of the door, where your name is protected whether you're in the room or not, where your vulnerability isn't currency but something sacred. Betrayal doesn't always yell. Sometimes it whispers behind your back while pretending to cheer in your face. And once you see it for what it is, you begin to understand. Peace isn't found in making everyone like you. It's found in walking away from the ones who only love you when it's convenient. There's a very specific ache that comes when you open up, when you finally let your guard down, take the risk to be real, to be raw. And someone meets your courage with mockery. They roll their eyes, they chuckle, they make a joke at your expense, and in that moment, what was sacred turns to shame. You don't just feel misunderstood. You feel exposed, like your truth was too much for the room. So you retreat. You fold back into yourself. You tell yourself, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe I was wrong to be soft here. But here's the truth that's hard to swallow and even harder to sit with. When someone mocks your vulnerability, it's not a reflection of your weakness. It's a reflection of their fear. Your honesty, your emotional transparency, your willingness to be seen, it unsettles people who have built their lives around hiding. Vulnerability threatens the comfort of those who are too afraid to feel their own pain, so instead of leaning in, they push it away. And sometimes pushing it away looks like laughter, sarcasm, dismissiveness. But what they're really doing is shielding themselves from the parts of your truth that mirror what they've buried in themselves. It's easier for them to make a joke than to say, "I see you, and I feel that too." Because acknowledging your vulnerability would mean acknowledging their own. And for people who have survived by staying guarded, that feels terrifying. So they deflect, they diminish. They pretend your depth is drama and your emotions are exaggeration. Not because they don't care, but because they've never been taught how to hold space for something that deep without feeling like they're drowning. The danger is that if you don't recognize this dynamic for what it is, you'll start to believe that vulnerability is the problem. You'll start to armor up. You'll stop sharing. You'll harden, not because you want to, but because the world taught you that softness gets punished. And yet, what we need most, what creates real connection, real healing, is vulnerability. Not the kind that overshares to be heard, but the kind that speaks truth even when it's trembling, even when it's unsure of how it will land. You deserve people who meet your vulnerability with reverence, not ridicule, who don't need you to translate your feelings into bite-sized, comfortable sound bites. People who can hold your honesty without making you feel like you have to apologize for it. Because real strength isn't about never breaking, it's about having the courage to be seen in your brokenness, and trusting that the right people will see your cracks not as flaws, but as proof that you're human. There's something confusing and deeply unsettling about the person who first mimics you, then turns around and tears you down. They adopt your style, your phrases, your energy. They watch what you do closely, closer than you realize. At first, it might feel flattering, familiar, even bonding. You think they must admire me. But then, out of nowhere, their admiration starts to curdle. They make snide remarks. They roll their eyes when you speak. They criticize the very things they once copied. And suddenly, what felt like connection starts to feel like competition. It's disorienting, because it's not always easy to name what's happening. On the surface, they seem supportive. They still show up, still smile, but underneath, there's a subtle tension, a sharpness that wasn't there before. Their compliments feel performative. Their presence starts to feel heavy. You sense the shift, but you can't explain it, because the betrayal is quiet. And that's what envy does. It hides behind politeness. It disguises itself as interest. But when someone imitates you only to later criticize the essence they try to adopt, it's not admiration anymore, it's a symptom of resentment they don't know how to manage. They want what you have, but they're ashamed of wanting it. So they take pieces of your identity, hoping to embody the same energy, the same recognition. But when it doesn't work for them the way it works for you, they turn their frustration back on you. They don't understand that your presence isn't just performance, it's authenticity. It's the result of pain you've processed, courage you've cultivated, and years of becoming who you are. And because they haven't done that inner work, wearing your traits doesn't give them your peace. So they mock it instead, to feel powerful, to feel like they've regained control of a narrative where they've always felt one step behind. And that's the heartbreaking part. This isn't about you being wrong. It's about them not feeling enough. Your light makes them uncomfortable not because you're too bright, but because it reminds them of the places inside themselves they haven't illuminated. And instead of doing the work to step into their own light, they project their discontent onto you. It's not conscious. Most of the time, it's not even malicious, but it's still painful, because you can feel when someone wants what you have but doesn't want to admit it. You can feel when someone praises you publicly but competes with you silently. And here's the truth that will save you from taking it personally. Envy doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It means you've become something someone else hasn't yet given themselves permission to be. That doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible for protecting your peace, because you're not here to be everyone's mirror. You're not here to water yourself down just to be more palatable for someone still drowning in their own comparison. You're allowed to shine without shrinking, and you're allowed to walk away from anyone who imitates you only to later resent you for being the real thing. There will come a point in your life when someone will say something so sharp, so deeply personal, that it cuts straight to the core of your self-worth. Maybe they'll call you too much, too sensitive, too ambitious, too emotional. Maybe they'll say you're selfish for drawing boundaries. Maybe they'll question your choices, your dreams, your very identity, so casually, like it costs them nothing to dismantle everything you've been building. And in that moment, you'll feel it. The rush of heat to your face, the tightness in your chest, the sinking fear that maybe they're right. But here's the thing you must learn to separate. Not every criticism is truth. In fact, most of the time, it's not about you at all. It's projection. It's pain leaking out sideways from people who never learned how to carry their own shame. It's their unresolved stories, their unhealed wounds, their fear disguised as feedback. They see you stepping into your power, and it triggers the part of them still hiding from theirs. So instead of doing the hard work of turning inward, they turn on you. They poke at your softness because they're terrified of feeling their own. They mock your discipline because they've given up on their own dreams. They call you selfish because they've been sacrificing their whole lives and resent anyone who chooses themselves. Their criticism is not a mirror, it's a wall. It's the barrier they put between themselves and the vulnerability they're too afraid to face. And yet, because we're wired for belonging, we internalize it. We start editing ourselves, diluting our passion, questioning our truth. trying to make ourselves smaller so we don't disrupt their comfort. But the truth is, someone else's inability to sit with your growth is not your responsibility to fix. You were not put on this earth to be agreeable to everyone's expectations. You were not meant to carry the weight of their discomfort just because your courage makes them uneasy. When someone criticizes you, pause, breathe, ask yourself, not are they right, but is this even mine? Because so often it's not. It's theirs, their doubt, their fear, their insecurity, and they're trying to hand it to you so they don't have to carry it alone, but you don't have to accept it. You can let them project without absorbing. You can hold compassion without taking ownership of their pain. Real growth comes when you learn to discern the difference between constructive guidance and destructive projection. One is offered in love, the other in fear. And once you can see that clearly, you'll stop letting unqualified voices write chapters in your story they were never meant to hold a pen to. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself they feel most comfortable with. And you are allowed to keep rising, even when their words try to pull you down. There's a peculiar kind of tension that comes when someone doesn't want to be close to you, but also can't seem to look away. They ignore your presence in the room, but your social media views tell a different story. They no longer respond to your messages, yet somehow know the details of your recent trip, your latest win, or that vulnerable thing you shared days ago. They avoid eye contact, avoid connection, but not curiosity, and that's where the confusion starts. Because if someone doesn't like you, why are they still so invested in your life? The truth is, avoidance is not always apathy. Sometimes it's fascination tangled up in resentment, admiration buried under jealousy, or worse, regret masked as indifference. When someone avoids you but still watches you, what they're often doing is wrestling with the parts of themselves they see reflected in you. Maybe you embody the freedom they never claimed, the confidence they suppressed, the boundaries they never had the courage to set, and so being near you feels unbearable, but not because you did something wrong. It's because your existence quietly exposes what they haven't yet healed in themselves. They scroll through your life like a story they want to forget, but can't stop reading, because in some way you represent what they gave up on. Or maybe you remind them of a version of themselves they once believed in, before life or fear or someone else convinced them they weren't enough. And now, instead of reaching for their own growth, it's easier to shrink from yours. It's easier to observe from a distance, to avoid direct connection, because looking you in the eye might mean facing something raw inside them that they're not yet ready to confront. It's heartbreaking, really, because you can feel them lingering. You can feel the absence in their silence, the space they take up even when they're not around, and it's tempting to personalize it, to wonder, what did I do? Why don't they want to be close? Why are they still watching if they've walked away? But their distance isn't always a verdict on your worth. Sometimes it's a reflection of their own discomfort, their unresolved feelings, their fear of vulnerability. And your only job in that moment is to stay rooted in your truth. You are not a museum for people to wander through when they're bored or broken. You are not a project or a spectacle. You are a human being, worthy of being seen fully, not just from the safety of someone else's distance. If someone chooses to stay outside your story while keeping tabs on every chapter, that's not connection. That's avoidance masquerading as interest. So let them watch if they must. Let them linger in the shadows while you stay in the light. Because you weren't meant to dim just because someone else hasn't found the courage to step out of hiding. Sometimes the loudest message someone can send isn't in words or actions, it's in the absence of both. When a person chooses silence over confrontation, when they disappear without explanation, it can feel like a punch to the gut. You're left standing in the void, searching for answers that never come. That silence screams louder than any insult or accusation ever could. It says, you don't matter enough to deserve the truth. It whispers, you're not worth the effort of explanation. And it leaves you drowning in questions and doubts that no one else seems willing to answer. This kind of silence is a profound form of rejection. It's a wall built not with bricks, but with the absence of voice. And it can be so isolating because it denies you closure, denies you the chance to heal, to understand, or even to say goodbye properly. It's like being erased, your presence in someone's life suddenly deemed unimportant without a single word. And while anger is loud, fiery, and demanding, silence is cold, calculating, and haunting. But here's what we often forget in the emptiness. Silence says more about the other person than it does about you. It reveals their inability to face discomfort, their fear of vulnerability, their unwillingness to engage with the messiness of real connection. Sometimes people retreat into silence because they don't have the tools to handle conflict. Sometimes it's because they don't want to feel accountable. Other times, it's because they're protecting themselves from feeling hurt again. And none of that is your burden to carry. You are not responsible for filling the silence. You are not required to chase explanations from someone who won't give them. Your worth is not tied to their willingness to speak. And the absence of their voice does not define your value. Instead, it invites you to find your own voice, to speak your truth even when they won't hear it, to hold space for your pain, your confusion, your heartbreak without needing their validation. Remember, silence can be loud, but it can also be your signal to step into your own power, to stop waiting for someone else to show up in your story, to stop shrinking for the sake of their absence. The void they leave behind is not a reflection of your significance, but an invitation for you to fill it with your own courage, your own healing, and your own life. When someone's behavior toward you feels confusing, when it's more than just hatred, you owe it to yourself to look deeper. These signs are not just about them. They're about the tangled emotions beneath the surface, the fears, insecurities, and wounds they carry. And while it's painful to witness, it's also freeing to understand. Their reactions are never really about your worth. They are about their own struggles, their own stories they haven't healed. You don't have to carry the weight of their confusion or their pain. You don't have to shrink, explain, or apologize for being who you are. Your vulnerability is your strength, your truth is your power, and the right people, the ones who truly matter, will meet you there with open hearts, not with mockery or silence. So choose to protect your peace. Surround yourself with those who lift you up rather than tear you down. Remember, not everyone's reaction is a reflection of your value. Sometimes it's a mirror of their own brokenness. And in that knowledge, you find your freedom. You find your courage to keep shining, without apology, without fear, because the person you are is enough, always has been, and always will be.